Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum-Milner.
And this is a podcast a la Latina.
The playbook to succeed, being your authentic self.
In this episode, we have Maria Salcedo, Senior Vice President Merchandising at Ulta Beauty.
The 3 key takeaways you're gonna get are: number 1, it has been proven that non-native speakers are better at making decisions.
Number 2, you're gonna learn how beauty is ingrained in the Latina culture and how the purchasing power of Latinas is essential for the growth of any company in the beauty industry.
And number 3, how getting an MBA is an investment you should consider to propel you to the C-suite.
This and more, here, a la Latina.
Stick around.
Welcome again to Season 2. We're so excited to be back.
We have with us Maria Salcedo. She's the Senior Vice President of Merchandising from Ulta Beauty.
She's also a board member at Step Up, a mentorship non-for-profit providing structure for girls.
She's from Colombia, an engineer by training, and she's a Wharton MBA.
Maria, we couldn't be more excited to kick off Season 2 with you.
Claudia, Cynthia, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
We want to start with getting to know you a little bit more, like who you are, what you do, and what brought you to be where you are and what you're doing today.
Lovely. So, as you know, and as you mentioned, I'm originally from Colombia. I was Bogota. Okay. I was born and raised in Colombia in kind of like a traditional family. I'm the oldest of 3. I have a younger sister and a younger brother. And my parents, they were very young. They had me when they were 20. So that creates like a unique dynamic in that sense. But traditional kind of like upbringing in Bogota, close-knit family, always spending time with the family, and fortunately having many, many wonderful opportunities to live and breathe in that amazing country. And you know how important your upbringing is and how it shapes you kind of like as you grow up.
Or your parents, did both of them work? Like, where is your work ethic coming from?
So that comes like from a long line, even before my parents. My dad studied economics, and he was a very successful businessman working in CPG all of his life, and my mother is a doctor. I probably have like a unique story in that sense that my grandmother on my mother's side, she went to college. She actually went to college here in the U.S. Both my grandparents on that side went to college in the U.S. So that is kind of like unique in that sense. So how it had shaped me and how it's a little bit different is that I come from a long line of working women, and that was slightly different from kind of like the norm, even of like my friends, right? I had many of my friends, their mothers were not necessarily working, and many of them were college educated, but that's not the norm, especially when you go back to like your grandparents, were they all able to go to college? That's not necessarily the norm. So that created a different kind of like view for me. And when I think about it, I wasn't necessarily aware of it. It was just how it was.
Las mujeres de tu casa. Like
mujeres.
the strong women of your household.
Always.
I don't know if this is how you experienced it. Tell me if it's similar to my experience, which is in my family, I had couples where the woman worked and couples where the woman didn't work. And the relationship that I saw of the couple was different. And I kind of always wanted to be in that couple that both people work and that there's some level of equality.
100%. I think the relationships are different and I even see it, for example, in the way my dad contributed to the household vis-a-vis kind of like a more traditional role of the bread giver. Like my mother is a doctor, so she was, and I shared that they got married when they were really young. So kind of like my mother was still going to school and finishing all of her years and years of studying medicine when I was young. So we would go grocery shopping with my dad. And my dad took on many roles that were not traditional for kind of like the male bread maker in the household. So that created a different relationship. I value it a lot because I saw a lot of partnership. I saw a lot of support. I saw how both careers were very important and how each one tried to make kind of like trade-offs to support the other one. I never saw at one point one or the other becoming more important, and it was just a really strong team effort. And within that, I think then my dad kind of like raised me and my sister thinking that we could do anything.
I guess this is a message to all the Ala Latinos, to the partners of our Ala Latinas. The only way that we can get to the top is if we have a partner that enables us and that supports us in our journey. So at some point, we'll start our Ala Latino.
I think that we have seen from all our guests the relevance of role models that really make them identify with them, seeing mothers that defy age, the concept of age, because they always felt young, and how is that affecting us. I think that in your case is professional, working, and strong women, but also a lot of emphasis on education. It seems to me that having...
100%.
Right, and that made your transition to move to the States and study here like a quite natural one.
Absolutely. Oh my God, you're so intuitive in capturing that, because education has always been perceived as something extremely, extremely important in my family, and kind of like your focus in your younger years, right? And that my dad would use, and I'm sure that your parents said funny things like that, like, I'm not leaving you a big inheritance. I don't have nothing to leave you. You have your education, and that's how you're going to be successful and make your life and be happy in your life. So it was always that aspiration. So I always knew that we would have the opportunity to go to college, and we did, and that I was very grateful for that. And then I knew that I wanted to pursue, like, it shouldn't end there, and that if I could aspire and try to pursue something higher, I should. And that's kind of like how then coming to the US for an MBA came about.
Also, something that we have heard a lot is the relevance of an MBA. Can you talk about that and how transformative that was for you?
Yes. I think it's one of the most transformative experiences I've had in my professional career. I think you...
Me too.
Right? In general development. A couple of things that are unique and that maybe have different angles for us moving into the country to pursue it. So the full-time nature of it, the immersion, right? Like, after having worked for some years, that gives you and shapes your mind differently, your perspectives differently. So the focus that you can give at that point in your life to education is different than what you've given in the past in high school or undergrad, where you're more like, I have to do these things, and then you find more application. Dedicating 2 years of your life to that, it's a big investment, and it's a big, big trade-off.
Not only time, but also money-wise.
Correct,
like,
because then you're not
not
making income for 2 years.
Yeah.
And also the fees.
And then you're paying, exactly.
Yes.
So it's like
and the traveling fees.
It's
expensive.
Very expensive endeavor. I remember telling my dad, it's like more money than I've ever seen in my life together, like what I'm investing in this, but it's a big bet. For me, it was also knowing that I was going to be having access to these professors that in many cases are like the ones that are leading the thinking, that are writing the books, that are being nominated for Nobel Prizes. Like, it's such an unique experience that if you're ever able to think about an MBA, I think it's worthwhile the consideration.
We haven't actually had a guest with an MBA, so let's have a little bit of a conversation, because I have strong opinions that have changed. Because I'm sure, just like with you, people come and ask me, should I do an MBA? Like, every time in any job that I have, people come to me and ask me, should I do an MBA? And at some point, maybe 5 years ago, when I was 10 years out of the MBA, and I saw a lot of people with an MBA not like reaching their full potential, and a lot of people without an MBA reaching their full potential, I started thinking, maybe it's not for everyone. Maybe not everyone should do an MBA. And I'm kind of moving on a different direction now. I think now most people should do an MBA if they have the opportunity, because the value of an MBA, it's not just the professors, it's the network, and it's the access that you have to the resources of your school after you do the MBA. But I would only do an MBA in a top school, because it's almost a guarantee that you're gonna be able to get a loan to study at a very low rate. I didn't know that. Like when I went to my business school, I didn't know that most students did not pay cash out of pocket for their MBA. They got a loan, which is in Latin America, it's unheard of. If you don't have money, you don't go to school. Turns out that here you are admitted to Harvard, to Wharton, to MIT, and almost automatically a bank is going to give you the loan. So money shouldn't be a problem. And you should assume that after going to one of those schools, you're going to get like the money back, because even now, for me, 15 years after the MBA, you're the same year as I.
Yes.
People still say to me, you went to Harvard. Like, they see my resume, and it was 15 years ago, and it's the first thing that people
50
say.
50 years ago, you look young, so much younger than that. How
so
do
I
you
think
do
it's
that?
a great
Like,
investment.
I think you're a vampire.
Beauty products, we'll talk about that later.
But wait,
Exactly,
okay, so
Ulta.
let's talk about this MBA.
Yes.
So we have 62 million Latinos in America, 32 million Latinas, so 9% of all America is Latina, and less than 1% manages to finish a higher degree.
Yeah.
But we're getting better at getting the basic college education. So we're graduating from high school 73% more than we did 10 years ago. We're graduating more from college, particularly city colleges and things that are more appropriate for Latinos. So I wonder, is it really about like going and negotiating with schools and saying like, do an MBA for Latinos, do an MBA a la Latina,
A la Latina.
which is probably shorter than 2 years. So something that people will go a little bit more because it's a bit more friendly, so that when you're like in hiring positions, do you notice the difference when you're hiring people that have an MBA?
I think I'm torn, because I can see many successful stories and many successes without an MBA. I can also see many successes with an MBA. I would say, if somebody asks us, when in my line of work or as I'm mentoring, when people ask me, is it necessary to have an MBA? I would say no, you don't need to have an MBA. However, I do super agree with your statement. If you have that inspiration, if you have that desire, and you have the opportunity, I would say yes, go for it, because it's like it's a no regrets. Cynthia is really on the mark, and I think that is an added value of education, is also the network that you're able to build, the connections, because they might not, at that point, they might seem like either college friends or just a professor. But as you go throughout in your life, you're going to see how these people can have the opportunity to become very influential, and you can be very influential in other people's lives as well, and just connection. So that is an extremely valuable point. I think we need to continue to focus. As we help Latinos in the US, we need to continue to focus exactly on the steps that you said. First, high school, then college, which is why I'm very passionate about Step Up, because it's really helping these girls in underserved communities realize their potential. And they, by and large, are first-time generation to go to college. And the difference there is, for example, I shared with you guys, I've been very lucky in that I had a line of my family that had gone to college. So that wasn't new. And I had people to mentor me and talk to me about that process, and then they could share their experiences. When you work with the girls that I love working with at Step Up, they don't have that, right? They don't have that support. And building a place where, or a structure, a process, a program that gives them that support, that is game changing, because you cannot be what you cannot see. And I think that's a lot of my drive. Like I saw it since my parents got married very young. I saw them progress through their careers, which is also something that is not necessary. Like I remember celebrating like when my mom graduated from medicine school, or when my dad got a promotion and he got a new job. Like I went through all of those steps with them. And that is probably where my drive and my ambition comes from, because I lived it with them. Sharing that and being able to express the opportunities and the possibilities to other populations, especially underserved populations, is like my bar none biggest passion.
And I don't know, but I don't think it's a matter of making an MBA for Latinas, because the studies, like even access to the professors, you can get it online. Right now, like HBX, you go hbx.com, you can get access to almost every Harvard professor, MIT professor. It's about the network that you create, that you can then literally pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm looking at this job. I know you work in that company. Can you help me get in front of the hiring manager? Can you tell me how does the interview process go? It's really about the network that you can only create if you go in person and you immerse yourself in 2 years of really intense studies. And I was making a joke about traveling, but there's a lot of traveling in the MBA. And that's how you create real friendships where people care about each other. So I think what we need is we need to get more Latinas to think,
make the bet.
I'm going to take 2 years off of my career and I'm going to invest in this because I know that after this, I'm going to be able to pay it back and I'm going to be making more money than my peers that didn't go to the MBA. That's going to leap forward.
Let's assume that's the case. Let's assume that we should not create Harvard Business Schools for Latinos and that we need Latinas to make the big bet. We need companies to support them. And we need universities to be, welcoming. And I think that the 3 elements are ready for now.
Yeah.
How do we start? If you would be, if you would be talking to someone from Step Up and you're like, you know what, one of the big bets you can take is doing an MBA. What's the application process? Yeah. How do we guide people?
I'm just thinking out loud because you're triggering so many good thoughts. But for example, what if there were Step Up version 2, right? The follow-up program that it actually has the structure to support exactly that. I did a lot of research when I was applying for an MBA, and you have to do some research and you have to work. And if you have somebody helping you and guiding you, it's great. Identifying the different tiers of schools, the different strengths of the school. What would I get? What kind of focus will I get in this school versus this other? What kind of learning program, right? Case-based or more academic-based. What do I want from that? Then going into the application process, which is usually a mix of standardized tests, although those are being sometimes phased out, interviews, recommendations, and grades and essays. Exactly. So those kind of 5 and working through those. And then there obviously you have to have a strategy of what am I showcasing here? What is my angle, right? What is my differentiation? So I do think actually,
what was yours?
That I do think. Sorry, I do think that actually, having maybe that for Latinos, that support, not a special program, but a special
training
of how to apply
the playbook,
instructions, the manual.
Yes,
that
the playbook
I think can be exactly because there is just some savviness about how to navigate the system and how to play the game, showcasing your strengths to kind of put you in the best light. I was an engineer by training. I knew that I always wanted to be in CPG or in retail, just very close to the consumer, and that comes from my dad. I have stories to tell you about what grocery shopping with my dad was like. It was standing in front of the shelves and him standing there with his little arms in the back and looking at everything and being okay, why do you think they're launching that? Look at this. Why do you think this is at the top shelf? It was.
Wow.
This is but that's unique.
You had an MBA with your dad.
I felt like I was
Terminator training.
And one of our favorite things to do as a family is go to grocery stores when we're traveling and see the different products and the different assortments. That is one of my favorite things to do.
You don't need a dad that does this to succeed in retail.
It is about mentorship and support. That's what I saw. That is what in my mind became a possibility, and that is why I love it. So then I'm just right now in a category that's beauty, that's even closer and nearer to my heart, but that's kind of why shaping and showing people what's possible is so important, or otherwise how as a 10-year-old would you know that is a cool job? So my angle was always about being very close to the consumer, leveraging my engineering skills, and obviously being kind of a transformative leader in a different type of perspective in the US market.
You didn't use a Latina
in the way that, and we can talk more about this because I know you have some questions around this. I think that when you grow up in a smaller country, not the largest economy in the world, like the US, you always know that there are more things out there. Mm-hmm. And you have this view of there's a bigger world. There are other economies in the world. There are different ways of doing things. We are a developing country. So you come in with a broader perspective because you have to, because you know that and in that when I was growing up in Colombia, 45 million people with a GDP that is lower than, I don't know, the earnings of Microsoft. Like, you know that there's more things out there, right? So I played the world view and like the different perspective that you can bring to the workforce in the US. So that was like my angle.
Honestly, the role that parents play in marking us, in setting who we are. What you just said about your dad going and asking, it's for me the creation of a huge eye that you have to understand the consumer. We're going to talk about that. And I just had a click with my dad, who was taking me. My parents divorced when I was very, very young, and so my dad took me every Sunday to Sanborns in Mexico to have a coffee. And he left me when I was 8 years old. He left me in my chair and left for 30 minutes and came back. And then he started asking me, like, what is the color of the sweater of the person behind us? How many plants are in this restaurant? And he thought it was funny, right? Like, he thought it was great. Like, it was like funny for me to know what was the conversation of the next one. Like, the first Sunday he did that to me, I was petrified. And then, because it was a recurrent thing, I started being really like trained as a Terminator. I came into any place.
Observant,
and there was like observing
dynamics.
Exactly. And then, like I hated him for that. But then now I'm so grateful to have an eye that is able to absorb and read a room and be able to see
and
things.
then navigate and influence, which I think you're great at.
Exactly. But you know what? That's honestly the influence that we play as parents in our children without even noticing. And I think that for us, transmitting that Latino, how do you portray yourself? Because we're in disadvantage, as you said, like from a most country, how do we actually take that already as a training as parents?
Okay, so we'll make the playbook for like how to
MBAs.
apply to an MBA.
Yes.
The most important thing is apply to the MBA. Like el no ya lo tienes. Ileana Musa said that. I think a lot of people don't apply because
know what the answer or the outcome is going to be if you don't apply, right?
Exactly. So, okay, let's move on from the MBA. Can you talk to us about your early career after your MBA? Why did you go to McKinsey? What did you learn there? I think then you went to Pepsi and then to Ulta?
And then to Ulta, correct, yes. There are very practical reasons, and then there are also some that are a little bit more intentional in terms of my career. When I came to the US, I came on a student visa, right? And that is one of the aspects of why an MBA was also made sense for me, is that if I ever wanted to work in the US, one kind of like straightforward way to do so is through an MBA and then entering the workforce, because that's how you can get a visa sponsorship. So that was critical and a natural.
I went to BCG, which is like another consulting firm.
I wanted, and I've told you all, I wanted to work in CPG. Well, lo and behold, I get here to the US, and those companies are not traditionally sponsors of visas. So when they go to recruiting to campus, which is amazing, and I was like, all there, like Victoria's Secret. Like, I remember all of the ones that I would get super excited, and they were like, we don't sponsor international students. And I was like, okay. So I very quickly figured out.
I know.
It is. That is another, that can be like another thing of all the notes that we're taking today. That is like those recruiting programs. And then that's why you get industries where the initial pool is much more diverse. And those are investment banks, private equity, consulting, that tend to just look for talent, and then they've adopted and built into their, I don't know, call it the cost structure of their talent, and said, you know what, if we want the best talent out there, if we want diverse talent, we need to sponsor visas. So that's how you and I, rightfully so, ended up in McKinsey and BCG.
I think now tech companies do it. I think Facebook, Google, but it used to be that really you had like 3-4 options. So.
Yes. Yeah. So that was I forgot that you and I shared exactly that. So that narrowed my choices. So I was like, okay, do I do investment banking? Do I do private equity? Do I do consulting? And if you think about what I already said, like what I wanted to be close to the consumer, general management, business management. McKinsey was obviously, your consulting was the most straightforward. So that's the mix of like practical decisions, which was getting a visa sponsorship, versus like more intentional of like, this is the field that interests me and that this is much more aligned. McKinsey ended up being one of the best decisions that I've made in my life. And it was basically a continuation of the MBA, working with an amazing, incredibly smart group of people, putting you in situations completely out of your comfort zone from
Working 20 hours a
one.
day.
Working like, yeah, that's like another part.
I think it's changed too. It sounds
I think
like
it's changed,
yeah.
which in general it has evolved. The work-life balance has
Yeah.
become more predominant,
hours.
which I think.
Yeah.
No, but it was like I remember one time talking about like, oh, with my husband who was also a consultant, like if we can get our lives and we can get to like only working 80 hours a week or
Yeah.
maybe between
Or like-
180, that will be life-changing because we were working
Yeah.
just crazy hours.
Right.
So I don't know that all our audience knows what the consulting industry is. So if you can give them both a little bit of insight into what it is and also for whom is it a good decision to start their career in consulting?
Yeah, so there are different types of consulting firms, but as the word implies, it's a group of people that help advise companies on different projects, on different questions, developing strategies. So because of that, a consultant has to become kind of like very well versed on many different industries and many different types of projects working with different clients, but they don't necessarily see the work through to implementation or execution, right? With that, consulting allows you to be as broad as you want or as narrow as you want. You can become an expert in, I don't know, supply chain implementation or a specific type of transformation project, or you can stay very generalist in terms of strategic thinking for companies and help companies with specific problem solving. I do think I'm an engineer by training. So I do think that helped kind of like organize my brain, and then consulting just really turbocharged that with a ton of structure and frameworks that you can apply just to any question.
Don't you use them now? Like I use my
Every
frameworks
day.
every single day.
Every single
Yeah.
day, I use what I learned at McKinsey, and it was great. You also learn a lot of partnership and organizational navigation because you're working with clients, executive presence because you just graduated, you have no idea what you're doing, and they throw you in with a client and the CEO of a company, and you have to pretend like you're an expert.
Yeah.
So you also like get
Acting.
a lot
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
And you were 2 years pretty much in every one of those jobs. How did you leave? Why did you leave? And what was your exit strategy?
At McKinsey, when I left McKinsey, it just so happened that I had a baby along the way. And consulting involves traveling a lot. Like you're wherever your client is, and you have like short, probably like 3-month-long projects, maybe 6 at most at McKinsey at least. And that travel was really getting in the way of the mom I wanted to be at that stage in my life. And it was a very personal just decision. I didn't leave at my breaking point. Sometimes people burn out in consulting or they're done with it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would go back to consulting quite honestly because I think it's very intellectually stimulating. But it was just getting in the way of the mom I wanted to be. So at that point, there are many consultants around the world in many different places. A Pepsi headhunter reached out, and Pepsi had a ton of ex-McKinseys doing strategy for them across the different levels of the company. So that's how I came into Pepsi. And then remember, I was then finally getting into CPG or retail, which was what I wanted. And food is also an area that I super, super love. So that's how I ended up working at Pepsi. I always focus on doing my job right first to then kind of like earn your next step. I do think it's a good practice if you can. It's not necessarily, it might be a little bit more traditional. It's not necessarily the only path. There are many paths, but I do think it's great if you can demonstrate and maximize every single company and get kind of like a next step in every company, because that really helps you get the best out of those experiences, demonstrate that you can really focus and be successful in many different organizations, cultures, types of challenges. So I've tried to do that in general, and fortunately I've been able to do that. And when I've had already been here 5 years at Pepsi in different roles, that's also wonderful about a company like Pepsi where you can have many different experiences. The opportunity for Ulta Beauty also came through a headhunter. So I am always open to listening to people. And I think you should always be open to listening, because there are many opportunities and you want to be aware and be the one that it makes me feel in control. Like if I know I have choices and I've made the choice that I am, in whether it's to stay somewhere or to move somewhere. So this was a headhunter that reached out about an opportunity at Ulta Beauty, and Ulta Beauty just really attracted me. I've always been a beauty junkie as a consumer. It was retail, it was growing. I was going to get to start a strategy team from scratch, which I would never get to do that in Pepsi, because Pepsi was much more scaled and established. And then the leadership and the team just really, I fell in love with. So that's how I ended up at Ulta Beauty. And now it's going to be almost 8 years since I've been there in many different roles too.
I want to tell you back something that I heard, but you didn't say it with these words.
Okay.
So you tell me. The first one, it's very much what I believe, and you tell me if you feel that way, which is consulting is a really good job. It's not a great job for somebody that's like in childbearing time. Years. So I think it's the best, or one of the best jobs you can get right after college. It's an okay job you can get right after an MBA, but after an MBA, you don't want to be spending that much time traveling. You're kind of probably trying to start a family. So at this point, I tell people, go do consulting right after college. You're going to learn so much that it's going to really propel your career in the future. If you can't do it after college, do it after the MBA. But after college, best or one of the best jobs. And the second one that you said, it's you took a job in a company that you saw potential. Not that you didn't take the job you wanted, you took the company you wanted, did a great job, and then moved internally. And I think many times we are looking for the perfect job in the perfect company. And I think if you had to pick, you pick the company, not the job, because ultimately, if you do a good job and you create relationships, you're going to end up in the job that you like, in the company you like. You can't change. If you choose a job that you want in a company you don't want, you're not going to then end up in the company you want. So many of us, I've done it too. You take a job that's available, maybe not the perfect job, but it's a company that you believe in, that you like the culture, and then internally you navigate. That's what happened to you, right?
I agree. And the way kind of like I expressed it in that when you say you take a job with the company, I think it's that company can provide you experiences that are going to be valuable. So I focused on the experience. That choice was led by, I will get to do something from scratch, build the strategy team that I think this company deserves and should have. And that was the experience I wanted, right? And I hadn't had that, and I was aware that I wouldn't be able to have it in the current kind of like structure where I was working. So I think you're right. And then after that, and obviously this is like just being more mature and more savvy and more confident, I focus consistently on experiences and the type of projects or the type of engagements that I think will be valuable for me to add to my toolkit as I continue just like to build my career.
Seems to me that you were very conscious and very strategic about your career, like that you had it almost like planned. Tell us about you and how did you manage to be where you are?
I think it's a journey, and I think we have to enjoy it and we have to have fun. And if you're not enjoying it, if you're not having fun, whatever that fun means, to me, it's being challenged. To me, it's like feeling a strong sense of belonging and a strong sense of purpose. Obviously, all of this sounds like, oh my God, she has it figured out. It comes with age. It wasn't as intentional when I was younger, Claudia. I just knew kind of like the space where I wanted, and I knew that I wanted to achieve, or at least aspire for something very high in the corporate world. But I didn't know necessarily how. At some point, it became a lot more intentional, and I was able to make more intentional choices. I do think that having a focus, or at least having an end goal, thinking about it, allow yourself to think, like, what could it look like? What could I aspire to be? I think helps keep you focused and like eyes on the prize, because it's not going to be an easy road. Believe me, there are moments that we've all had where I'm like, I'm going to like quit tomorrow. This is like the most, I don't know, disturbing, frustrating experience I've ever had. But if you keep your eyes on the goal and you're like, wait, why am I doing this? Go back to why am I doing this? Take a breather. I think that goal, that focus helps us kind of like align and then it's like all of this merges. And then the people that support you know what you're striving for. They'll help you as well. Your mentors will guide you. Then you have sponsors. It just coalesces.
I want
Your
to
network.
ask what are you manifesting now? How do you see yourself? And also because I think that for me has been incredibly inspiring to see how all our other guests either learned later in life that they could have a goal and a dream, and it was not at the beginning. And then, how do you make sure that others see you like the way you see? If you see yourself as a CEO, how do we make sure that others are going to start seeing you as a CEO so that you can propel that faster?
So, and this also comes with like how you manage ambition. I understood that I was ambitious in this sense. And at some point I was like, maybe I shouldn't be so overtly ambitious. I think there are ways of being ambitious. I am ambitious. And you pointed out, I do have aspirations of being a CEO. Now, that's one of my paths. I have also an optional path that is a little bit different. But for now, I'm on the path of I want to build all of these experiences towards a bigger general management role with significant responsibility. There was a point where I decided that I saw that as engaging, that I saw that as fun, that when I looked at people in the C-suite, I was like, wow, I like their jobs. Like I would love to do that. So that is kind of like where I'm headed right now.
Yeah.
And I've been vocal about it with my mentors at work. Not
With
in a-
our audience,
with
we
a-
all see Maria Salcedo
We're
as a
manifesting.
CEO.
I don't.
If you are recruiting for a CEO,
Maria Salcedo.
Exactly. All right. So I want to share with you one thing, guys. I went to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and this year I had the opportunity to talk precisely about MBAs and higher education with two people, the president of Harvard Business School and the president of the University of Chicago. And they were both very, very not even excited, really focused on getting more Hispanics, particularly Latinas from the US. And they were mentioning that not a lot of Latinas access the incredible opportunities that there are for financial aid, for scholarship, for application. It's almost like we self-censor because we are so aware of how much debt and how much investment that means that we're like self-imposing non-application without really exploring the opportunities that are out there.
I agree. And I think that is something that we can definitely think about how to help solve, because an MBA is a great opportunity. And in the US, there are many different vehicles to help you fund and pay for an MBA so that it's not a debt that you're going to have for all of your life. So the plan of how to apply to an MBA, how to access higher education, and then how to pay for it has to be a well thought out one, but one that we probably need to better communicate that there are many different options and that it's very viable and that we do need Latinas to apply more.
yeah, there's a lot. We will gather resources and share them with our audience, but there's a lot of scholarships that you can get access to that can pay part or the full tuition and even
tuition.
sometimes living expenses. Then whatever is left, you can get a loan. And I think we have to think about MBA loans or student loans differently than college student loans, because the salary that you're going to make after doing an MBA is going to really be a big step up from where you are. I don't have the data to say that you're for sure going to pay back your debt, but I feel strongly that you will.
No, but the return on investment has
Exactly.
been proven to be higher and to be a much safer investment.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk about like Latinas in beauty. Overall, I know that we have an increasing purchasing power, 9% of the population with 80% of the decisions of the purchasing power of the household, and that is $3.4 trillion a year. That is massive. If this would be the GDP, Latinas hold 80% of the 14% of the population. That means really we're responsible for 10% of the GDP of America in our decisions.
Wow.
And our decisions have been our most favorite product that we bought 10 years ago was Mazola oil. Today, lipstick. How do Latinas understand beauty? What are the insights that you see?
So Latinas are a hugely important, relevant cohort within beauty. They over-index in spend in beauty overall compared to their Caucasian counterparts. Latinas, by and large, play broader and deeper in many more categories across beauty. So if you think about it and you think about an ideal, we call them beauty enthusiast or an ideal kind of like beauty consumer, Latinas will basically, by and large, fit squarely in it. So there are things that you can think about. Think about the role of fragrance in our lives. Like, fragrance is a huge business. It's much, much bigger per capita in Latin countries than it is, for example, in the US. And fragrance has been growing in the US significantly, by and large, driven by the Latina consumption. You have many different fragrances throughout for different occasions. You spray more than just once a day.
Yeah.
I shared an insight in an interview about how, and I don't know if this was true for you guys, but for even like when I had my kids and when I had my children, scent is so important that it's either Colonia Baby Johnson's or like a fragrance. Like, it's super important. Like, from day one, you're lathering your kids in some kind of scent. So that just gives you an example of how ingrained all of these beauty categories are within Latinas. So beauty, it is a huge growth cohort and a huge area of focus. It is also very interesting the relationship that Latinas have with beauty and how it's a really honest and authentic relationship, and maybe a little bit more advanced than where the US was. It's getting there, and I'll tell you why. When we grew up, you've probably heard the term being vanidosa, and this is really like vanity. If you translate it into English, it's vanity. And vanity has many negative connotations in English. However, in Spanish, and in the context that we've used it in our culture, is not a negative.
It's coqueta.
It's coqueta. It's like it takes
Confidence.
Confident.
and you take care of yourself.
Exactly.
Like, you want your daughter to be
Vanidosa.
because she takes care of herself. She thinks that self-care is important. She cares about her appearance, and that's good and positive. So we grew up with a relationship with beauty about, if I put on makeup, it's not because I'm insecure. It's because I'm taking care of myself, and this is how I want to show up today, right? If I take care of my hair, it's not because I'm frivolous. It's because it's self-care, and this is how I get together, how I start my day. Through the pandemic, what happened in the general kind of like US culture is the pandemic really cemented beauty and self-care. So now we're seeing the US population also have this very healthy relationship with beauty. And in that, Latinas are becoming a huge focus, a huge trend-setting cohort. Through culture, through pop culture, through music. Think about like Karol G and like how Karol G is right now establishing a really feminine yet kind of like grunge, or not grunge, but urban approach to beauty and to trend and look. So we're seeing Latina influence everywhere.
But also, you were talking about how beauty is transmitted through your parents, and how that creates like brand loyalty in a very different way.
I think we can each talk about what was our first introduction with beauty, and by and large, it comes through your mother. And it's a beautiful insight, and it's a beautiful process. If you think about it, it's either put on, I do a very Colombian thing that is like putting on moisturizer every single day right after you take a shower. And like, that's like from day one. And like, I see it how I ask my daughter, like, ¿Ya te echaste crema? Like every single day. So that is how we kind of like breed the relationship with beauty. I remember going into my mom's eye makeup or makeup drawer and like playing with her palettes and all of that. Through them, we learn like what kinds of brands they like, what product attributes they're looking for, like where do they shop. So we also see a very strong sense of loyalty to brands, to some of these brands that are epitomes to beauty in the US, like a Clinique, Lancome, Estee Lauder, like Dior, that are brands that have always signified beauty. There's a strong affinity and strong loyalty from the Latin consumer, Latinas consumer in the US for those brands.
I just had a moment. I used my mom's brands.
Yes?
I just like literally. I just was like,
Think about hair, que estás. Like,
totally. I use my mom's brands.
Right?
Totally. But you know what? There's one more piece about the physical aspect of Latinas, and I think that this is a great way to get into identity. The perception of Latinas very unfortunately, is very much associated with our physical attributes, denying any other attribute of Latinas. So we're seen as sexy, loud, beautiful, vanidosas, but never as intelligent decision makers, leaders. And so, by definition, if you're not conscious on the biases that you have of Latinas, then we will be put into corporations in roles where our physical beauty plays a role. The receptionist, the people that are like showing up and so on. I think that that's where it plays a down role, where we have to be conscious that we can be feminine when we come to work, we can be beautiful, but that there's a stereotype, a bias about us, so we have to play carefully about it and making sure that people don't only see that and we don't accentuate the stereotype.
I personally find it super empowering to come into a meeting room fully dolled up in a dress with ruffles, right? Like a very feminine dress. And then just be probably the strongest contributor at that table with data, knowing my business cold, with insights. I find it super empowering to kind of like break that stereotype. And I think that is where I see my authenticity coming through, and that I found that way to put the two together. But I agree with you, Claudia. For me, it's more important that people think I'm smart than they think I'm funny or pretty or like that comes like in second.
Yeah.
I always try to come to the table, of the business table, with knowing that I'm good at what I do, that I bring a lot of value, that I can create value for a company, that I'm insightful. And then on top of that, this is just how I like to look and like how I like to dress. But I find that a source of power, and I've turned that into kind of like one of my maybe superpowers.
Did you ever experience environments in which you had to hide your Latinidad to be able to get ahead?
Slightly in how you adapt to the different cultures, and you might think about it. So when I entered, for example, consulting, I wasn't necessarily dressing the way I do or the way I really like to dress. I wasn't because they told me to do something, but I was just like reading the room and looking at others and kind of like maybe trying to adapt and conform to what I was seeing.
Yeah.
That is where I think today, with more maturity, right? Like having lived a little bit longer, I would say I shouldn't have done that, because I could have still be. I'm glad it didn't last a long time.
Yeah.
And towards the end, I felt like I was being myself. But those are silly things that I don't think you have to compromise. I understand respecting organizational cultures, but like just making sure that you're not necessarily compromising where it's not worth it. That was like a trade-off that I personally made that wasn't necessarily true to myself.
And what do you think are the biases that you see in your industry towards Latinas or Hispanics in general?
I do think, to your point, that there's a stereotype of what like Latina beauty means. And that's why I brought like an example of current influencers or other types of talent, performers, celebrities that are disrupting and showing the breadth of what a Latina woman can be, or the trends that we can set, so that it's not necessarily only the bombshell or the fiery and fiesta. Like we're all feisty. We're all, yes, I agree. But that's not only kind of like what we bring to the table. There's another thing that I wanted to talk about of like when and if English is not our first language. There are a lot of kind of like stereotypes or assumptions that come with you not having an accent, or maybe at some point, right, like not finding the exact perfect word. Or, for example, I'm an expert at like butchering like, all of these sayings in English. I'm like, what is it?
Me too.
I never, that kind of thing. There might be some negative connotations that people draw up on themselves, and I really love to fight those. And I think that is actually, in another panel that I was, somebody said it's actually racism. Because if you think about it, and for example, in beauty, there are many French people and European people. Nobody ever thinks that they're not smart because they have an accent, but they do think that of Hispanics or Latinas. And that is extremely unfair. So then I went to, there's a Harvard study about a behavioral study. And it demonstrates that non-native speakers are very good at decision making when you're making decisions in not your native language. Because when you're talking, when you're speaking in a foreign language, you're better able to remove the emotionality from these decisions. So you're better at making very clear even moral decisions, rational decisions, and even more risk-taking than only like speakers of just one language and when they operate in their own language. And I thought that very insightful. And I thought, maybe that's something that I was not necessarily aware English gave me. And that maybe that is why I am decisive. I try to be decisive to help my teams and to help the company. Maybe these decisions come easier to me because of this, because of our language, of not being a native speaker. And I thought that was very interesting.
It's amazing how getting just reinforcement on something that maybe you already knew, but now you have the data. Now there's a Harvard study. They're like, okay, now I can trust my instincts.
It was a study of like one of those kind of like interesting and challenging moral dilemmas of like, do you save this or do you save them or others, and how they did it with native speakers and with non-native speakers, and consistently it was faster and it was cleaner and clearly the right choice when you were a non-native speaker.
We need the link so we can put it in the...
I'll share it with you.
I'd like to know how being a Latina has helped you. What elements of your identity and Latinidad you can pinpoint and say, like, because I'm a Latina, even if it's a bias or a stereotype, I was able to, we're discovering from accentism to biculturalism, bilingualism, but also to more intelligent decisions. So what else were
I'll tell you another one that I love. I think it's not only relevant to Colombians, I think it's for many other countries. I obviously equate it to being Colombiana, which is like what I'm first and foremost, and it is optimism. I believe optimism is key in being a good leader. I believe optimism is key in business and in life. And I do think that my culture tends to be very optimistic. If you think about it, we're kind of like put in very hard situations. Our countries are all very facing like different types of social or economic crises, right? Hyperinflation, economic downturns, I don't know, at Colombia, the war on drugs, the guerrillas. And you have to have a certain positive attitude to get through it and to not be bogged down as a country. And like, I feel my country at least is like the little engine that could, like, everything is falling apart, but yet we're there. And we're still a growing economy. Exactly. And then you have a little music and you turn it around. So optimism, I think, would be the one. I think humor translating into not taking yourself too seriously and being self-deprecating, because that gives you perspective as well. Like, that helps not have an ego that overtakes your decision-making. And I think humor is also a big part of it. And then it's kind of like combined with this, but resilience, like you knowing that, in the conviction that you can get through these things somehow. And there are many sayings about mañana será mejor, or like no hay mal que dure 100 años, and that's resilience, right?
Yeah.
Resilience and great, exactly. All of the things that you mentioned were that. That's amazing. And I think that we created this podcast pretty much to make sure that we're bringing to the level of awareness that people know, our Latinas know, the companies that are willing to hire Latinas know, so that we can make it in half the time. So if you could give yourself an advice in half the time, like, look, when you were like 25, 30 years old, what would you say? What would be the playbook that Maria Salcedo would give to Maria Salcedo Jr. and say, like, do this?
I think it's so interesting because honestly, I don't think I would have listened to anything 30 years, so it probably would have been wasted omega over me, because let's be realistic. Like, at that point, you're not really paying attention.
Pay attention.
So,
Don't omega us, okay?
omega. But I would tell myself to trust the process, because there are moments that are very sticky, right? That you feel like you're treading in mud. And those moments are really hard, but those are the moments that really test you, and kind of like trusting the process. Because having focus, as I mentioned, then helps align energies, intentions, people around you, your efforts, so that way you achieve your goals or continue on a path towards your goal. Because that's another part of it. The goal is not everything. Actually, the journey you have to enjoy. So that's part of like that trusting the process. And then more tactically, one thing that I've loved about how the world has evolved, I shared with you guys how I saw my dad be kind of like an employee at a big company, and that I followed that path. I, however, had ideas throughout my life of like products or companies, but I never acted on them because I didn't grow up in an environment, and I don't think in general the world where we grew up in was really positioned for entrepreneurship, but now it is. So I don't necessarily think I'm going to become an entrepreneur right now, but I would tell my younger self, like, when you have those inklings of products or ideas, just know that there is a way, and you could create a company from scratch. Because honestly, remember how we said you cannot be what you cannot see? Like, that was not even an option in my mind as I kind of like was growing up at all. And I love that it is right now for many people. I think that's super exciting.
That risk is achievable, manageable, something that we can
And
touch.
doable, right? Like it didn't, companies were not created the way they are right now.
Yeah. There's venture, etc. Were there any moments in your life or people in your life that you feel like you wouldn't be where you are if they weren't there or those moments hadn't happened?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that recognition of those moments and how pivotal they're in your life is very, very valuable. At one of my companies, there was a very senior person in HR who at some point told me he thought I was starting to get lost in the mix. And he thought I had incredible potential. And that although he was in HR, and it probably was not in the best interest of the company for him to tell me this. He said, if you don't get X or Y here in this time frame, you need to go out and get this type of role because you're that good, and I cannot have you kind of like waste your potential here. And sometimes these things happen in companies. And that really taught me to take also ownership of my career and acknowledge they don't all work out. Not all places work out, not all jobs work out. So when you start noticing that, like, you have options and go look for them. And I'm always very grateful for him. And then my husband, we started talking about partnership at the beginning, and my husband has always been a fabulous partner. He also pursued an MBA. He did it after I was. And I remember some of my favorite moments with him were when he was a student at the MBA and I was already working at McKinsey, and we would have some of his school events. I would go there, and obviously in those, I was the wife. And people immediately assumed that I was the wife, just like in the US for 2 years with him, having babies and like hanging around, which, okay, it's just don't assume, like, that's an option, right? And he would stand there, and he told me that this was his favorite thing to do, is to just stand there and wait for people to ask me questions. And then suddenly they realized, oh, she also did an MBA, and she's working at McKinsey, and actually that they wanted my job, and that they needed to talk to me, and that he loved that moment when the conversation turned around, to flip the script. And he watched it, and I never knew that he was looking at that, and that he was observing that moment, and that he was proud of that moment. So find a partner that supports you every day.
And that came from your parents, because you saw that. You saw that level of partnership.
And your grandparents, because your grandma was also professional.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Okay. Do you have any other Latina in mind that you think we should invite to the podcast that can help our audience?
Yes. I think I have many Latinas in beauty that are extremely impressive. So I'll just give you a list. And we have, I don't know if you've met Michelle Freire. She's the president of Clinique.
Love her.
Love her.
Love her.
Right? Super insightful, great mentor, great human, exceptional business person. I was just mentioning Kimberly Villatoro. She's the CEO of Patrick Ta. A wonderful, wonderful person, and also exceptional business person. Malena Higuera, she's the general manager at Urban Decay. Agnes Landau is the CMO at Shiseido. I actually am so proud and so privileged and humbled by these group of women. And I can continue the list. I can continue. And I also
need
think
another episode.
We need to do something bigger, like that, to coalesce these amazing women in the level of mentorship and sponsorship and influence that we could have together across our companies and the industry.
This has been an incredible episode. I have learned so much, and I grew my admiration and respect for you, Maria Salcedo from Ulta.
Leading
A la Latina.